Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 13, season 2. I am beyond honored to have today's guest on, Mr. Dan Brisebois of Tournesol Farm, a really cool collaborative farm in Quebec. One I've admired for a long time. Big fan of Dan's and that farm, but we're going to do something a little different with today's episode. So I'm going to do this a few times this year, in fact, where I talk to a farmer about a specific thing, a type of crop, an aspect of no-till growing, a marketing approach, or whatever, and really dive into that subject in great detail. And with Dan, although we do talk for a minute about CSAs and Dan's new farmer, Spreadsheet Academy, which is awesome, by the way, the focus of today's episode is seeds and seed production on a small scale. But hold on, before you say, oh, okay, well, I'm not really that into seeds, I don't really care about seed production, I'm not a seed saver, that's not my thing, I don't have the space for it, whatever. Well, let me make a quick elevator pitch for why we, as no-till growers, need to care more about seeds, and why I felt this episode in particular was important to do. It goes like this. Chances are that the seeds many of us are using are neither grown in a region anything like our own, nor at all adapted to a system of low or no tillage. There is a chance that some of our seeds we regularly use in our compost-driven systems come from parent plants who have never even met compost. And it's possible those seeds are dramatically underperforming for us, as they are not adapted to or trained to make those complicated symbiotic connections we rely on for plants to access the nutrition they need. Success with no-till growing, that is, with growing the healthiest crops possible, is not just about the system. It is very much also about the seeds we use. That's why I'm challenging myself here, and you, to care more about this subject and start thinking about some amount of seed saving on your own farm, possibly seed selling too, because there is also a great chance that we as growers are all missing out on an exceptional economic opportunity here in growing and selling some amount of seed to local gardeners and other growers. I'm not suggesting that we need to grow all of our own seed, not at all, but some? So, all of that is to say, give this episode a chance, even if you care diddly about seed production. In fact, we're dedicating this week to seeds on the blog at no-tillgrowers.com, like a seed week. It's like Shark Week, but seedier. So, go check that out as well. But before we get into today's episode, let's get a quick word from our show sponsor, Farmers Web.
Farmers Web software makes it easier for your farm to manage working with your buyers. By lessening the administrative load and increasing efficiency, Farmers Web helps you save time, reduce errors, and work with more buyers overall. Our free account includes features to manage your real-time and coming-soon product availability, and tools to create your own availability calendar to inform buyers on the seasonality of your products. The free account also includes access to the Farmers Web Guide to Working with Wholesale Buyers, which offers pro tips and best practices on how to work with restaurants, schools, and other similar buyers. A 1-month free trial is available of the paid account, which includes features to manage your customers and orders, give select buyers special pricing and payment terms, track your buyers' payments, send invoices, keep detailed sales records, and much more. You can even manage orders for buyers who don't place them online. Access a demo video and learn more at farmersweb.com.
Big thanks to Farmers Web, and enough from me for now. Let's get into this amazing conversation with Dan Brisebois of Tournesol Farm. Dan Brisebois, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to have you. I'm a longtime fan of your work and the work up at Tournesol, and I was hoping that you could kind of, give us a little rundown of Tournesol. Where are you all located? How much land do you have under cultivation there? And since this conversation, we're going to kind of focus it on seeds, I'd love to know what percentage of that land is in seed production versus the other things that you all do.
Okay, yeah. So we're outside of Montreal in a town called Les Cèdres in Quebec, so in Canada, just maybe an hour north of the U.S. border, and in a fairly rural area. and we have a total of 12 acres that can be tilled. And of that 12 acres in any one year, we have 1 acre in seed and 6 acres in vegetable crops. And the vegetable crops, we have a 500-member CSA, and so the vegetable crops go into that. And then with the seed, and I'm sure we'll talk more about all the details of it, but that 1 acre of seed is about maybe 60 to 70% of the seed that we sell, and the rest we get from we have a network of growers who grow just for us, and then seed people who grow, have their own companies, but we also get some seed from them across Quebec and sort of the Northeast US and Ontario, and then we also get some seed from a few growers out west. But the bulk of what we sell is produced on that acre.
Okay, so then 6 acres veg, 1 acre seeds, and then that leaves you with a handful of acres. Are those in cover crops, or how do you manage those?
Yeah, the secret acres. We have. So the remaining acres are in cover crops, and so our seed crops are mainly in a rotation of 1 year of a cash crop, and then 1 year of a cover crop to flush out the weeds, and then goes back to seed, and then so it's one on, one off. And in our veg, it's mostly 2 year of veg and then 1 year cover crop. There's a little bit of variation of that, but that's mainly how we do it. And I should mention that so it's 1 acre is seed and then 6 acres is vegetable. But about our sales, it's about 30% of our sales currently are from the seed production, or maybe even 35 or almost 40% at this point. So it's really growing, and so you can see there's a real difference in the seed and the vegetable. But that has a lot to do with the fact that we do direct marketing. We're selling seed packets as opposed to selling bulk seed. I think if we were to sell this seed on contract from 1 acre, we'd probably be making something between $20,000 and $30,000 off of that acre. But it's the fact that we're putting it into tiny packets and selling it through an online store and through seed racks that we're able to inflate that amount and have a better margin.
Do you know what on that acre, what generally you bring in for seeds? You said 20 to 30,000 if you were just selling it wholesale, but what's when you're selling it retail? Do you have like an approximate what that grosses?
It depends per crop, and it's kind of misleading because if you look at something like tomatoes, so if you take a cherry tomato, you have at least a packet's worth of seed in that cherry tomato, and you can sell that packet for $3 or $4. And if you think you have 100 cherry tomatoes on that plant, you got 100 packets. That plant is suddenly worth $400, and you extrapolate onto an acre. For something like tomatoes, it's not easy. It's not hard to get to like $900,000 an acre, which is phenomenal. But that is a lot. It's a couple 100,000 packets of seed, and that's very difficult to sell. So the number is a little bit meaningless when you look at the direct marketing part per acre, though it's exciting to look at. It is interesting when you're comparing something like tomatoes, which might be at $1 million an acre, with something like squash, which might be after markup might be like $100,000 an acre. So you can see that maybe you'd want to prioritize certain types of crop, but it really depends on what your seed clients want to buy from you.
Yeah, that's so interesting thinking about it that way. Before we get too far into the marketing stuff, though, I want to hear, you said that 1 acre of seeds was, you do an acre of seeds and then you do a year of cover crop to kind of get the weeds out. Like, how does that system, is that because when you're doing seed production, you're probably ending up with a lot of those seeds falling on the ground and then you end up with weeds from that crop? Does that make sense? Is that kind of what the issue is there?
That's exactly it. It's hard to harvest 100% of the seeds. Generally, we're harvesting probably 70% of the seeds on a plant, like just a ballpark figure, and that means that the rest will be shattered on the ground, and so they fall on the ground, and they can become quite a weed problem the next year, depending what you're growing. So if like you had an arugula seed crop, and then the next year you want to follow it with carrots, you're going to have so much arugula coming through. It's going to be a real weed problem. So we have a few strategies to avoid that. And so the first thing is after a seed crop, we never till that actual year. So we let the seed rain down onto the soil, and then through the fall, there's the rains that fall on it, and that'll germinate some of the seed. And then there'll be a certain amount of predation that happens from beetles and mice and other creatures that will eat the seed. And so the combination of things eating seed and the seed germinating really eliminates a large percentage of what is at the surface. And then it goes through a pretty harsh winter because we're in a northern climate. And then the next spring is when we'll till under and prepare to put into a cover crop. So by then we've probably flushed out 80 or 90% of those seeds, or have eliminated the potential for germination of 8 to 9% of those seeds. And so it really reduces the amount. And then by tilling and then putting the cover crop in, it gives another chance to flush out more of those seeds over the summer. And by the time the next year happens, there's very few volunteers coming back from that seed crop.
That's cool. It's like a stale seed bedding for the crop that you just grew. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, and after stale seed bedding.
yeah, that's great. So I kind of want to hear. Okay, let's start with this because I'm curious about. We talked a little bit about like what you can make per acre. But like you said, it's a little bit misleading. So I maybe want to dive a little bit back into that in terms of like what the economic potential is behind doing some small scale seed production.
Yeah. So what I would say is running a retail seed business has some fundamental differences with running a vegetable business. And so if you're a market gardener or a CSA farmer or a wholesale farmer, often we think about the difference between farmers market and wholesale, and there's like a world of difference between the price. But you're talking about, at most, what is it, 50, like for small scale wholesale production, maybe it's 50% difference. So that's not that huge. And what it means is that if you want to make more money and you're a vegetable grower, you need to either raise your prices quite a bit or grow more. But even if you raise your prices, it only has so much impact. And basically you got to be harvesting more and to sell more to make more money. And you try to do that more efficiently to use the same amount of labor, but you're always restricted by what you can grow. And the labor that goes into the harvesting, the weeding, and the selling. With a retail seed business, it's different because, like in a packet that might be $3 or $4, there's somewhere between 10 and 50 cents of seed. And we like it when there's only 10 cents of seed, but some stuff like corn might be like 50 or 60 cents in seed. And you have to have a diversity of stuff on your rack. But it's a small portion that's actually a result of the growing. Most of the rest has to do with the packing and the selling. So you can sell far more than you can grow. And your bottleneck tends to be in a retail seed business, tends to be the marketing rather than the production. And even though we do grow a majority of the seed that we grow, our seed business has more in common with a business that buys stuff in and then processes it and sells it out. And so you could say that we're buying about $25,000 or $30,000 of seed from ourselves to then package and sell. And that's why it's really important to be careful about how you look at that $1 million an acre number, because all the work has to do with, having a good website, making sure people find it, engaging with your communities, writing newsletters, developing a reputation over the years. Like all these things are what sell seed and what makes this business profitable. It's not it's not changing your spacing in your field. Whereas in the vegetable production, changing your spacing in your field can dramatically change the profitability of a crop, but it's not really the same in the seed case.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit? You mentioned the website, but what are some other ways in which you're marketing the seeds?
Myself or like a hypothetical seed grower?
I guess it would be in the retail sense, like a hypothetical seed grower, but also yourself.
So I would start by saying there's two ways that you can sell your seed in a large amount, in a big view. You can either sell your seed in packets, or you can sell your seed in bulk, like a large volume. And And so when you're selling your seed large in a large volume, bulk or wholesale, you're probably selling it to a couple clients, and in most cases, it'd be to another seed company. And when you're selling it that way, you're talking a lot about selling at 25 to 40 or $50,000 an acre. Then when you're selling by packet, the way that you can sell is essentially you can have an online store. Some people still have seed catalogs that are print, but I think all the new seed companies pretty much just jump in online. And so in that case, somebody clicks on your site, they put out an order, you fulfill the order, you ship it to them, or they could pick it up. So that's one way you could sell packets. Another would be to have seed racks in stores or nurseries or at other farms. And so in that case, somebody would commit, they'd buy the seed rack, let's say there's 48, or in our case, there's 60 spots for varieties on it, and then there'd be 5 or 10 packets per variety. So like each rack would be somewhere between 300 and 600 packets that go out. And it can be done as a final sale or also on consignment. And so it's a bigger sale than just like what you might get off of a website. And then another way that you can sell seeds would be live, as in like at a farmer's market. In Quebec and Canada, we have these events called Seedy Saturdays across the country through the winter. And so in a community, there'll be one day a year that they'll have a Seedy Saturday or a Seedy Sunday. And so it's kind of like a seed farmer's market. And there'll be 2 or 3 to like a dozen, depending where it is, seed vendors who show up, and they'll be selling seeds. So gardeners come to buy seed, and then there'll usually be a seed swap, so gardeners can exchange with themselves and farmers can exchange with themselves. And then there'll be some workshops. And there have been Seedy Saturdays like this across Canada for I think since the late, like about 89 or so, if I recall well. And at this point, they're really, really across Canada. And so we go to 12 or 13 through the winter. And a Seedy Saturday is a really nice venue because you just have to show up with your seed and people come and buy. They don't have to discover you online, which can be a challenge when you're just launching yourself. And so this could happen in communities anywhere. And you could also go to farmers market and kind of sell the same way, just showing up and people come and get stuff from you. So I think those are the 3 big ways to sell packs. And so at this point, we have an online store, which is pretty important for us, and it's growing. And then we go to about a dozen of these Seedy Saturdays. And then we also have about 70 seed racks in about 70 businesses across Quebec and a little bit in Ontario. And that's kind of how we sell our seed.
There's so many interesting things in there, Dan. This is great. So, okay, so I want to hear a little bit about those seed racks. And what kinds of stores? You said there's 70 of them. What kinds of stores are there, and how do you find them?
So we've been doing this. Like we started seed racks almost 10 years ago, and we started off at the local co-op in town. And then a couple friends of ours who had a farm, they bought a store, like a corner store in Quebec City, and they had organic vegetables in it. So they got a seed rack from us. And so at the beginning, the first 5 or 6 seed racks that we sold were to people in our community or people that we knew. And then we gradually expanded. And maybe about 2 or 3 years ago is when we kind of made a jump from like 16 to 30 racks, and like 30 to 45 to like 50, and now we're at 70. And who knows what 2020 will bring. But so at the beginning, it was very organic and very word of mouth. And that's really nice because people are a little bit more forgiving as you're developing the business model. At this point, we go out and are looking, we try to find people wherever we can find them. And so we go through the internet, we looking for nurseries and health food stores and ecological stores and like co-ops. And then we also, whenever, there's a number of us on the farm, we actually didn't really talk about that, but at one point we should mention the fact that we're a worker co-op, but there's a number of people working on the farm, and people, if they're somewhere where they see a new business that they hadn't noticed before that they think might be good for a seed rack, you can approach them. And over time we build up that clientele. And not everybody who tries the first year will stay with us. But people who are with us for 2 or 3 years are usually in for the long haul. And it's kind of similar with the CSA is, we're trying to get people to be with us for a couple of years, and then, those are the people we know are going to last for a long time.
Yeah, I love that. You and I had an exchange online recently about that, and maybe you could talk about that for a second, just to break off, because I think if it as it relates to the seeds, but also I love that idea of if you can get somebody to stay beyond a year or two, then that's a kind of a different client than just that first year CSA subscriber. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so at this point, we now have 500 CSA shares. We started so at the fall of our first growing season was 2005, and we had 110 CSA shares, and we've grown over the years, and now we're at 500 CSA shares. And this year we made a decision to drop our farmers market and only do CSA, so well plus the seeds, but we're a pure CSA in terms of the veg, and 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 that's beautiful to look at that way, but what we've noticed, it was a bumpy road along the way. There was a certain point we got to about 260 shares fairly quickly, and then we had a really hard time breaking through those 260 shares. And it took us a couple years where we were kind of at that plateau and feeling a little frustrated. And what we did is we went back and we looked at all the people who had ever gotten a CSA share from us, and whether they renewed or not. And we kind of looked at them through time, and we also looked at them through the different drop-offs that we had. And we noticed a few trends. And one of the trends was that, so I guess there's two kinds of things we noticed. One was that we had people who'd been with us from the beginning. And even at this point, we probably have maybe 10% of the clients that we have of our 500 members we've had for over 10 years. Maybe even like over 12 years. So there's this core that have really sworn by us from the beginning. And so those are the customers that you want. But then the other thing that we noticed is that of the people who sign up in a year, only about half of them will continue on to the next year. And it depends from year to year how that works. But just on average, we keep seeing that. If we got like 100 new people in 2019, only 50 of those will carry through to 2020. And so it's when you're – and I wouldn't be surprised if this is true across a lot of CSA farms, though I have no data for that. But what that means is if you're new and you only have 20 shares and you're trying to get to 200 or 300, you got to get there's a lot of attrition that you have to make up for over the years. But what I find is if somebody will stay, you can get that person to stay for 2-3 years, they're going to stay with you a lot longer. And the people with you for 3 years, you're meeting their needs and you're doing stuff that they appreciate. And so the things that'll make them drop at that point are, if they move, that's a big thing. If they move, if their kids' schedules change and suddenly the hours no longer work, and it becomes about logistics rather than about the content. Whereas the first year CSA client, I find it's really the experience that either works or doesn't work for them. And until they've actually done a year of CSA or even a couple weeks, they don't fully know what they get into. And not everybody appreciates having minimal choice or fixed hours or this or that. Yeah, so that's kind of my spiel.
No, I love that. And I like that we put that in there because it's one of those things that I've been thinking a lot about the CSA model lately and just wondering, like, I don't know. Yeah, maybe I have a misconception of whether or not it's really functioning. But I love hearing when you kind of take that first year out and look at your 2-year members and your 3-year members and start readjusting your impression of what the retention rate is. That it kind of changes the whole conversation and maybe gives you a little bit more enthusiasm towards what you're doing.
Yeah, and if I can just wax a little bit more poetically about CSA. I think that when you look at it a big picture, it's easy to say that the time of CSA is past. Farmers markets are here, and maybe now it's wholesale that we want to be doing. But if you're an individual farm and you want to run CSA, you only need so many clients. So you just have to find the right clients for you. And once you got them, you got to hold on to them. And I love CSA more than other marketing venues for a few reasons. And prime of them, or number one of them, is that you really build a relationship with your clients that's direct to people, and if you have a hard time, they can be more forgiving and they can be more understanding. And when things go really well, it really benefits the future years of what the relationship is with you. Whereas if you have a wholesale client that's a local grocery store, I mean, it's fantastic to support these businesses. But if things get rough, they might not have the same loyalty to you that a CSA member might. And I think that it's just so much easier to build almost like family bonds with your CSA members than it is with like a market client, though you can have really reliable, great market clients, or a wholesale client. And I think that there's a people want a direct link with their farmer, and CSA offers a way to do it that farmers markets and other sales methods don't. And not that they're like, I have so much respect for all these other sales methods, and if you've got it working, I think people should keep doing it. But I've really enjoyed CSA for the reasons I've said. And maybe one last thing I would say is when you're at farmers market and you're dealing with clients, it's hard to not be in your vendor mode and be trying to make the sale. But when you're at CSA with these clients, the sale's already done. So you're not trying to do an upsell or sell them something else. You're just trying to make sure they have a good time. And you can, ask about their kids and do other things and not at all have to acknowledge that this has been a financial transaction at the beginning. And it makes it much more pleasant to I guess for the farmer in those contexts. Not that selling is a bad thing, but it's nice to not have that hat on. And for the client's perspective, I think they don't feel that they're just a dollar sign. They feel that they can feel the love that you can give them.
It's funny, the relationship thing I think is so important in all aspects, and that goes for anything. Like I just like walking into a gas station and the person recognized me, anything. Like just having that sense of familiarity, and being wanted and respected and appreciated. Is that something you all get in terms of the seeds? Is that something you all get from those Seedy Saturdays? Is that something like, are you often building relationships with smaller clients around the seed production?
So it's a fantastic comparison, and we try to, it's something that, when I'm at a Seedy Saturday or when I deal with a seed client, I try to treat them like a human being in the way I'd like to be treated, and try to remember who they are. But sometimes you see these people once a year, and it's hard to have the same relationship than somebody that you'd see 20 or 30 times a year, week after week. And so I think it's a little bit, though we try to be personable and to be intimate with our clients, it's hard in the seed world to be as much as we can with the CSA. But there are some clients that, are getting seed from us every couple of months, or sometimes even weekly. I don't know what they do with it. I mean, they're doing it with their garden, but there's some really avid gardeners who just keep getting new stuff. And, every season when we have, if you have potatoes or garlic, they're here with the next thing and they're thrilled to get it. And we do get to know them. But one thing that, kind of to pivot back to CSA, one group of clients that is particularly loyal to our seed is the CSA members also. And so we also sell seedlings like transplants in the spring. And it's been interesting to see that there's not an insignificant number of sales of seeds and plants that go to our CSA members, because they, all believe in good living and good eating, and gardening fits in very well with that. And not all of them are gardeners, but a lot of them are. And some might view it as a competition with a seed company or with a vegetable company. But I find that people who appreciate the vegetables the most tend to be gardeners who appreciate that too, and just really understanding the challenges of gardening, value even more what we do.
Wow, that's great. There is an element that seems sort of counterintuitive for somebody to be buying vegetables, but then also a lot of our CSA members have always, they always try to garden, or they want to be gardeners or something like that. So it does seem that I guess in that way it's not that surprising. Hey, you all, just jumping in here real quick to say that as you peruse the options for different conferences and such this winter, keep us in mind. We will be in San Diego for an event with Jared Smith of Jared's Real Food and Stephen Cornett of Nature's Always Right in February 2020. Jared is doing some really amazing, profitable permaculture stuff. And he's doing interplanting and lots of polycultures. He has hedgerows, but he's doing it on a profitable scale in lasagna beds. It's super cool. And it makes sense for that climate. It makes sense for market gardeners. We think it's widely applicable. And then for Steven's part, he derives much of the fertility he uses on his urban micro farm from the property itself, using KNF and other techniques. Going to dive deep into both of those things. And also, I'll be presenting on no-till. There will be delicious tacos and plenty of time to mingle, plus lots of nerdy information. So check it out at no-tillgrowers.com. And as always, there are discounts to Patreon members at patreon.com/farmerjesse. All right, back to Dan. I have a question about these Seedy Saturdays in terms of the kind of clients that what kind of people are coming to them? Is it farmers? Like, are you often selling in a fair amount of bulk, or is it more predominantly like home gardeners? What's the clientele at these Seedy Saturdays?
I would say it's predominantly home gardeners. I think there's sometimes a certain amount of newer farmers that go to those, but I think with time the newer farmers tend to realize. So at these Seedy Saturdays, it's mostly seeds in small packets, like sort of garden formats, not in bulk. So it's not a great place to go and stock up for, like, if you want to grow hundreds and hundreds of feet of carrots. But there are farmers who might go there to pick up a couple packs of tomato seed or pepper seeds or things that you only need so many seeds of, and or they want to get specialty varieties or heirloom varieties. But there's not a lot of farmers that are probably buying all their seed in these venues. So it's predominantly gardeners. But in terms of the type of gardeners, there's really every kind of people that show up to these. There's, young people, older people, people from all kinds of different backgrounds. There's a lot of cultures that respect food and gardening. And so we, just all kinds, such a diversity. Now, some communities, it tends to be like some communities, maybe it's a specific group of people that organize the Seedy Saturday, and it might be more their friends that wind up there. But in some of the larger cities like Montreal, there's the Seedy Saturday is 3 days long, and it's an event that's advertised in newspapers and on the radio. And there's I don't know how many, but there's 20,000 people that go through this event. So there's all kinds of people that show up.
Wow, that's cool. So, okay, so I want to kind of get into a little bit of the technical stuff when it comes to seed growing. And the first thing that kind of comes to mind, like, let's say that I've been growing a seed that I really like, kind of adapting it to my system, or I've kind of got it to the point when it does well in our climate or whatever it is, and I want to sell it. My question is, what are my sort of legal obligations, and how does one navigate those sorts of things?
Yeah, so that's a whole can of worms there. There are two. I guess there's a couple things to think through. One is, starting off, is it an open pollinated seed or a hybrid seed? And so open pollinated is if you grow this variety without other varieties of the same species that could cross up, but you just grow that variety and you save the seed from it, it should breed true to type. That means it should give the same thing that you started off with. Whereas a hybrid seed is two different lines of seed that have been crossed together, and you get something fairly uniform. But if you save that seed and you grow it out, you're going to get a whole diversity of different types of things, and different combinations of the parent plants that, like the parents of that hybrid. And so the first thing is you can't really start with hybrid seed if you're going to be selling seed in 1 or 2 years. So it opens up the world of open pollinated seed. And now in the open pollinated seed world, in North America, there isn't a lot of regulation that applies to all seeds, but there are things that can. So, like in Europe, there's a whole catalog of varieties that have to be registered, and there's so many more regulations to sell vegetable seeds. In North America, those regulations almost only apply to grains like cereals, and don't really apply to vegetable seeds. So we're lucky in that regards. But the place that you can get in trouble with is that there are patents or what's called utility patents, and then also protections, PVP protections on seeds that can restrict what you can do with that seed. And these are really, really important to know. So certain seeds have a PVP on them, so a plant variety protection, I think that's the acronym. And that usually it lasts for about 20 years after it's issued. So during that period, you can't save seed from that and sell it to somebody else. However, during that period, you could save seed and use it on farm. But in terms of sales, that's off limit. And then stuff that's under utility patent, these you're not allowed to sell seed and save seed and sell it. You're not allowed to save seed and use it yourself, but you're also not allowed to use it in your own breeding programs or do anything basically other than grow it as the vegetable and sell that vegetable. And so it's quite restrictive. And there's an even further layer is that the utility patents aren't so much on the variety, but on the traits, like the physical traits that the plant has. So one that I know partially, I don't know all the details about, but Salanova lettuce that a lot of people grow, there's a utility patent, and I believe it's on how the leaf attaches to the core of the lettuce. And so the patent is on plants that do that. So I couldn't start. So there's two things. I couldn't take this seed and then use it in another breeding program, but I also couldn't take seeds totally unrelated and develop this type of plant because the concept of that structure has been patented. And I think there's been some challenges with that specific one, but I don't know the details. But in essence, that's the challenge of utility patents. So when you're starting with varieties, you should check to see whether there are utility patents on them or PVPs on them. Now, if you're just selling a couple thousand packets of seed in your community, no one's really going to look at that, and you're not going to probably get in trouble. But if you're selling 20, 30, 40, 100,000 packs, and people pay attention to you, that's where you could get in trouble. So in our case, at the size that we are right now, we're very careful that we don't use PVP seeds or utility patents. And and maybe it sounds a little bit scary, but people have to realize that most seed out there doesn't have these PVP or utility patents on them. And the PVP, there's stuff that was PVP years ago but is expired. So there's a lot of stuff that's now in the public domain. And so that's something to be aware of is the regulations around the seed. I would say there's one other piece that's good to be aware of is that where this seed comes from, who bred the seed, or whose seed is it. So there are a number of independent plant breeders out there, and also corporate plant breeders, but a lot of amateur and independent plant breeders and farm-based plant breeders who release material out there. And if you're taking their varieties and propagating them, though you can do that legally, they might not fully appreciate it. So it's good to touch base with them and talk with them about that to make sure that you're doing something that they're okay with. And the seed world is a really nice, tight community, and so it's a good way to be a good neighbor is to be in good communication with people whose seed you might be using. And there's even a further extension of that is that there's a lot of seed that's has indigenous backgrounds. I mean, ultimately all seed has indigenous backgrounds, but a lot of seed might have a more direct relationship to a community. And so there's ethics about how you go about selling that. And I'm actually not an expert on that topic, so I don't want to delve too much into that. But there are questions that are really important for us in the seed world to be thinking about.
Yeah, that's great. So are these PVP protections and the patents, when you're looking for those, are they easy to is there like a resource that you go to check in and make sure that seed doesn't have one of those?
So in the case of patents, there's a website. I think it's through GRIN, which is like I think it's the U.S. There is a website. I just said there's a website that you can check for PVP, and you can find the varieties fairly easily. So that's not hard to do. The the plant utilities, or the utility patents. Those often when you'll buy the seed, you might get a notice saying that there's a utility patent with it, or find that on the, like I know Johnny's has a notice about that for the Salanova seed that I was referring to. So usually the company tries to tell you that that's the case.
Okay, so let's say that you get, I mean, I wonder if it's ethical or it's legal in this question that I'm about to ask, this sort of hypothetical. If you get a seed that has one of these utility patents on it, but you sort of adapt it and change it a little bit over the course of a few years to be something that maybe a taller plant or a smaller plant or whatever it is, at that point, can you change the name and just have a different seed? Like, I'm kind of curious, like, how they keep up with that stuff.
So this is just to be clear, there's PVP plants, and there's utility patents, and it's not the same answer. So if you had a plant under PVP, you could save some of that seed, cross it with something else, select something different, and there is some, like, there are a little bit more complicated than what I'm going to say, but in general, if you've developed something new out of a PVP variety, you can release a new variety from there. That's specific to PVPs. With the utility patents, you're not allowed to legally save the seed in the first place, so you can't even use it to breed something new. And this is a challenge. Even at an academic level and in university plant breeding programs, they can't use this seed without express consent from the owner of the patent in their breeding programs. So it becomes a bit of a stumbling block in future plant development or plant breeding in certain areas.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think about like wanting to potentially do some seed sales because we have, or just doing some of our own seed breeding. And maybe this is where we should go next, because I'm kind of curious, like, well, go ahead, Dan, if you have something you want to add to that first.
Yeah, I would say, so this is not my area of expertise, the whole legality around seeds. But there's a fantastic podcast called Free the Seed, which really jumps into plant breeding and talks a little bit about these issues. There's an initiative called the Open Source Seed Initiative, so OSSI, that has been developed over the last, I'm not sure how many years, 5-10 years, to kind of really address these situations and try to propose a different framework. And so the Aussie project does have a podcast called Free the Seed. I think the 3rd season just dropped, and people who are interested in this it's a fantastic resource to find out more, and also to hear inspiring stories from all kinds of plant breeders.
That's cool. And I was talking earlier before we even started the podcast how much I'd like to hear a good seed saving podcast. So that's a great shout out. What is the potential for saving your own seed? Like, I think about this, especially in the no-till movement, where our systems are kind of very specific and very different probably than the people who are breeding our seeds. So do you, in your opinion, do you feel as though saving some of your own seed, or perhaps breeding your seed for other people who have a similar system to you, has a really great advantage as opposed to buying in a lot of that same seed? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it's, when I got into seed saving, I was a new farmer and I was really excited about saving seed. And I had this vision of growing all the seed I produced. And it kind of felt like the ultimate way you could close the loops. You can close fertility loops, you can close seed loops, you can close all kinds of loops. And growing all your own seeds seemed like a really noble goal to have. I've been saving seed now for nearly 20 years, and our farm only uses about 20% of the seed in its market production that we grow. So 20% of the vegetable seed that we're using for our CSA baskets comes from us. That means there's 80% that comes from other people. I know very few people who are growing more using more farm saved seed than we are in a market or a CSA farm of our scale. And it's not easy to grow it all. And at this point, I am not striving for that ideal anymore. And there's a lot of reasons why it's not easy. One is just time. Another is that like we grow, I don't know, 60 types of vegetables, and then the number of varieties of each vegetable. So there's hundreds of varieties on the farm. It's just so much work to grow all those. But then also the climate plays a big impact. And so where we are in Quebec, it's fairly hot in most summers, occasionally cold, very, very humid, a lot of rain. Today it's pouring. In the summer we have periods as it just rains and rains. And this causes problems with certain kinds of seed. So there are whole families that we have a hard time producing the seed for. So we have a hard time producing the seed for the carrot family, beet family, onion family. Those especially, we just can't get the same quality that we can get of like a tomato seed or a squash seed or a pepper seed that works really well. And so if we were to be relying on our seed of these other species, we might have to compromise some of our expectations in terms of germination or in terms of disease. And though I do know people in our climate who grow great seed of some of these species that we have a hard time with, it's hard to do it all really well. And so at this point, I don't think it's definitely a noble goal, and anybody who does it, I have a lot of respect for, but I think it's beyond most market gardeners' aspirations to do that. Now, but that's not to say you shouldn't save seed. And what saving seed can give you is there's a lot of different things it can give you. One is if you have a variety that you love and that you're really dependent on, it might disappear on the marketplace. This happens. And it can disappear for a couple reasons. One is there can be a crop failure. Like often, sorry, my alarm went off. Yeah, often. I got to get back into my headspace. Often a number of seed companies, or often there'll be one source for a seed variety that supplies a number of different seed companies. And so if that one source has a crop failure, then all the seed companies that distribute it won't have it available. And so that's a challenge that can happen just based on the same way that we have crop failures as market growers and as CSA growers. You can have a crop failure as a seed grower, and your clients in that case are ultimately these vegetable farmers who are disappointed to not have the seed. So that's one thing that can happen. And another thing is that seed companies are businesses that need to make financial decisions and financial choices. And the same way that it's hard for a market grower to keep, if you're at a farmer's market and you're selling 200 bunches of carrots a week, it makes tons of sense to keep carrots. But if you're selling 10 or 15 bunches of something else, I don't know what, let's say skirret, some weird root, you're selling 10 or 15 bunches of this, or scorzonera or salsify, it might be a lot of work to get those 10 or 15 bunches proportionally. It's a lot more work proportionally per bunch to get it to market than it is for those carrot bunches. So it might make financial sense for you to drop those weird roots from your stall. Maybe there's reasons you want to keep them, but it might not be a great idea to have it on your stall. And it's the same thing as a seed company. If I can sell 1,000 packs of something, that's really exciting. But if I'm also selling stuff that I only have 25 or 30 packs, and that's not a small seed business, but if you're extrapolated to a larger company, if you're selling 2 million of something and you're selling only 20,000 of something else, those 20,000 those items that you sell 20,000, you might not see the financial reason to keep it going, and so you might drop that off. And
Dan, you still there? Dan.
Sorry, this cuts out for a second because Dan is going through a crazy storm while we're having this conversation. However, if there's anything that we sort of gloss over or that you want to ask more questions about, Dan is going to be doing a live Q&A with us on December 17th, 2020 for Growers Live with Josh Satin. That is on our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and you look up No-Till Growers, subscribe because we're doing live Q&As over there regularly. And you can ask a lot of our podcast guests and a lot of other people that we have on the show any questions. So anyway, check that out. Dan's back. Let's get back to the conversation.
And the last thing I heard was you were talking about if you're a big seed producer and you have like a small lot of something, that may be something that you would drop off.
Yeah. So if you're a and it's not seed producer, it's seed company, because the producers grow the seed for the seed companies. And so if there's a contract, the producers are very happy to provide it, but the company, they're going to make decisions based on economics, and so they drop stuff, and it's easy to find fault with that, but they are business decisions and they are independent entities, and so it's kind of how business works, and that is a reason to. And so there's a few different things about that. I feel like I can go into a million tangents here, and I would just say there's a really important role for organizations that preserve biodiversity and seeds to make sure that these varieties that we have varieties that go forward in the future, even if they don't meet today's economic needs of a seed company. But there's also a great place for people to be stewards of the seed that they love. And so if there's a variety that you're really dependent on, that is like that you find this variety is better than anything else, I think it's a really good idea to start saving some seed from it, because if there's a seed supply, if the seed supply changes, you will then be well equipped with that seed. And then the real advantage of growing your own seed is that the seed will adapt to your site over time. So we can talk about breeding new varieties, but even without breeding new varieties, when you grow seed well on your farm, year after year, it just does better and better for your site. And you're going to wind up choosing subtle differences of what you like, and it's going to make the variety do better for you. So not only if you have something that you love, can you preserve it, but you can actually make it better by saving it on your farm or in your garden. And this is where I think seed saving is really strong for market gardeners, is not to try to grow everything, but to try to grow a few things well. And you can and I think there's a place that you can then play in a community, being a steward for that seed. You can play a place in your business by having a more resilient, reliable business, because there's something that you can offer that maybe no one else can. And ultimately, it can lead to interesting economic opportunities, because if you do have something that's superior to what's on the market, seed companies would like to buy it from you, and then they can do the marketing. And so this turns into a wholesale or a bulk kind of relationship. But if there's something you have that is particularly exceptional, you can probably get a higher dollar per pound or kilogram of that seed than if it's something that's very common, and it can give you it can bring you higher to that $50 or $60 or $70,000 an acre, as opposed to just being at a $25,000 or $30,000 an acre seed crop.
And okay, so now that we've kind of touched on the sort of bulk idea, can you talk a little bit about contracts with wholesalers and the companies? Like, what do those contracts entail? Are there contracts? Is some of it just like handshake stuff, or what? I mean, what is that? How does that work?
So, so a larger seed company is either buying its seed from a wholesaler or it's buying it from a seed grower. And that wholesaler ultimately is buying it from a seed producer. And so in that larger ecosystem, everything is worked on contracts. So somebody gets a seed contract for a certain volume of seed at a certain price, and there's probably certain expectations of germination rates and a number of different quality criteria. At our scale, where we're small fish in this big pond, and we when we do have contracts with growers, but it's fairly like an email chain that we go through. So it's not just like a verbal. There's an email chain, but we rarely get, we don't have a specific document. We just have all the details out in the email exchange so that it's really clear what it is, but we don't have a big document that people are signing. So contracts do exist, and they would specify what is expected on both parts. And so if you want to sell seed to seed companies, it's really good to start off by talking to them and telling them that you're interested in this and asking what they want, what they're looking for, and perhaps trying to get a contract. Now, if you have no seed saving experience, there's a good chance they're not going to take a risk on you. So you kind of have to start saving seed and building up some reputation, and then they might take a risk on you. And then, they'd be happy to give you a contract, and they'll be quite clear on a number of the criteria. Something that's dangerous to do is to want to sell seed to seed companies, have no experience doing this, growing a lot of seed on speculation, and then approaching a seed company and saying, hey, look, I've got this. Do you want to buy it? And it's possible they're interested, but more likelihood they're not. They probably already have suppliers for the seed of that type that they want. And so to gain experience, you kind of have to grow on speculation or grow for your own needs. But if you want it to be a reliable business model, you need to be getting contracts from seed companies. And this is where, if you have something that's particularly exceptional, that you've been, like, let's say you have a squash on your farm, and there's something about it, I don't know, it was a little bit different, like an off type in the population that you had been harvesting from, and over a number of years of selecting, you've gotten it to all look like that, and it's, it stores better, it's delicious, nothing else like it on the market. And you approach a seed company, they're probably the first thing they're going to want to do is trial it. So they'll take some seed from you, take a season, grow it out, and then based on that, they might be very happy to buy anything you have from it, or they might be happy to contract you for the future of it. And it can be really exciting for a seed company to have something like that offered to them, because companies are always looking for new special things to distinguish themselves and better meet their clients' needs.
Hey you all, last interruption from me. If you're really enjoying this episode, I am putting up bonus videos of Dan and some of his seed saving tips and tricks this week over at patreon.com/farmerjesse to join the many other pieces of bonus material we have put up there for the hardcore show supporters. We're happy to give the podcast away, but if you want a little bit of extra nerdiness, go kick in $2 or $5 over there at patreon.com and get access to that extra nerdiness. I was there at Tourne-Sol in October, and Dan took us through some of the processes from saving seed on biennial, saving seed on some peppers, different pepper trials, and a bunch of other stuff. Check that out at patreon.com/farmerjesse, where at a certain level, not only do you get discounts on merch and etc., events or anything like that, you also get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Benson Morris, Isaac Buells, J.M. Fortier, Jeffrey Hayes, Kevin Keene, Ryan Gosser, Tiffany Jackson, Weaver Akers, William Henpen, Yannick LaPlante, Polly, just Polly, and Soul Mystic or AUM. Big thank you to all of our show supporters. Back to Dan. Yeah, that's okay. So are there situations like with these contracts where there's shared risk, like in the contract, if there's a seed failure, if there's a crop failure, is there any shared risk there, or is that all, how does that work?
I think it really depends on the contract, and this is not a world that I don't, we started off as contract growers for a few seed companies, and at the peak we were probably growing for about 12 seed companies. Almost all of them were very small bioregional seed companies. Only one of them was a bit larger. And in that case, if we had a crop failure, we would assume the risk. And I think that there's a lot of contracts that are like that. However, a seed company, if it's relying on the seed grower, they want to be careful that they don't have that the grower has a bad year and then just quits growing seed. So I think that seed companies that work with their growers will try to find ways to offset those risks or offset those losses. So let's say I was growing 10 or 12 seed crops for somebody, and 2 of them have crop failures, but I have 2 others that produce a lot more seed than was expected. In that case, the seed company might be willing to take more of the other seed to kind of make up so that the total contract value is the same as what was initially negotiated, even though the makeup is different. And even though they might not have an obligation to do this, they might choose to do it because they want to keep a good standing with that grower. Now, this is assuming that the the fault is at the grower's fault. Now, it's possible that the seed company provides seeds or some kind of information that's wrong, and the grower follows those instructions, and the problem is due to that. And that's a whole other question. And I think the seed company will probably try to find some way to compensate the grower really in that case. But in the case where it's the grower who is at fault, I think that there's a certain amount of responsibility the grower has to take. And that's why seed companies aren't just going to jump into a relationship with anybody, because they want proof that it's going to work out.
Right. Okay, so there's also like a few different kinds of seed producers in a way. Like there's people who kind of create the foundation seed, right? And then people who maybe grow out that seed so that it's more sellable. Are those two different things often, or how does that work?
Yeah, there's such a diversity of different seed producers. There's people that just produce one kind of crop, and there's some people who produce tons of different kinds of crops. And then there's some people who they're the ones who develop the crop and they propagate it. And then there's some people who will just take the crop that you give, that the company gives them, and they'll grow it out. And then there's some people who will produce, as what you said, like foundation seed, that they might get. Like, so the seed company might have a very small amount of foundation seed that got developed through a breeding program, and they need to increase it. So they might give it to a seed company who then increases that to a larger amount, but that's just enough so they can be passed on to another grower who's going to then grow it even larger amount. And so in that case, there might be expected to have, pay attention to different things, eliminate certain off types, and there might be a higher dollar per pound or kilogram, because it's such a more valuable product for the seed company. So there's all kinds of different relationships, but like that's kind of beyond where I live in terms of the seed world.
Okay, so maybe you can kind of take us through a crop. And the one that I kind of think about is head lettuce, because that's a crop that we sell a ton of. It's not super hard in our climate to produce that seed. It doesn't, at least seemingly so in our climate in Kentucky. Getting a lettuce plant to bolt is not the hardest thing, and having a long enough season for it actually to get to seed. So, maybe you could kind of just take us through a crop like that and give us kind of what you would look for while it's growing, and how you would sort of decide which traits. Like, it can be hypothetical or something you all have done before. It'd be interesting to just sort of hear that process.
Okay, so with the process would begin at the beginning with seeding. So let's say this is a variety that you're going to transplant out into the field or into your greenhouse. You would start off by seeding into your seedling trays. And so at that point, for lettuce that's going to be for a seed crop, I might grow 3 or 4 cells, 3 or 4 seeds per cell in my seedling tray. And excuse me. And this means that I'll choose the best seedling that germinates. So already I'm selecting for germination, and I'm selecting for seedling vigor. And then I might grow, let's say, 50% more plants, or maybe even more, than I'm going to need for the field. And so I only plant out the best ones. And the best ones, again, I'm probably looking at vigor. I might be looking also at color to make sure they're the right color and the right leaf shape that you can see at that seedling stage. And so there's another selection phase there. Then we plant them into the ground. And then as they're growing, you kind of walk them and watch them. And so if you see anything that's really off type, with lettuce, you don't see a lot of off types. But if you did, you could eliminate it at that point. Or if something's looking a little bit more runty or not so great, you could eliminate it. And then at harvest is when you have another. So in a case of lettuce, you could get, if you're doing salad greens, you could get a couple cuts of lettuce leaves from the plants and still get a seed crop. If you were harvesting like head lettuce, that might not be feasible because you're kind of cutting too low in the plant. But so let's say you're getting salad greens off of it. It gives you a chance to look at each plant and select the ones that you like better than others. And so there's a few different things you could do. You could be eliminating at this point anything you don't like, or you could be flagging somehow the ones that you do like. And that's a point to select for. And things you might like, it could be the leaf texture, it could be the quantity of leaf that's there, the colors. It could also be the taste. If you want to, you could taste the different lettuces to see if there's diversity. But in the case of lettuce is fairly uniform from plant to plant, so it might not be the best example, but it's the process that would go through. And then once the lettuce harvest is done, you would eliminate anything that's not been flagged or eliminate anything that you don't want, and then you let them go to flower. And this is another point where you can select, because you could have different floral structures or different number of stems or how thick the stems are, and you could select on those traits. And we prefer to have a couple main stems rather than like 1,000 stems, in part because we're growing our lettuce for seed often in a tunnel or a greenhouse, and so we don't like it to fall over onto the side beds. It's nice for it to stay nice and contained, and then then it'll produce the seeds, and then you harvest the seed. And let's say you planted your lettuce in the ground on May 1st. Maybe by June 1st, you're probably cutting it. By mid-June, late June, it's probably, let's say mid-June, you're no longer cutting that lettuce. And then it's going to go to flower over the next couple of weeks. And then you're probably harvesting it sometime in mid-August. And so you can see that you might not want the lettuce that is in your, the lettuce that you're going to let it go to seed is going to be in the ground much longer time than the lettuce that you're going to be harvesting for your salad greens. And so it might not fit into the same garden layout. For a couple reasons. One is irrigation. Let's say you're doing overhead irrigation. You really don't want to water those lettuce plants once they bolt and go to seed. And that's probably the biggest reason that it's a problem. So on our farm, we have separate areas for seed crops and separate areas for vegetable crops, and we manage them differently. And I can see that if you're in a no-till situation, that you might, and if you're able to irrigate by the bed or by small groupings of bed, you might not have a problem having seed crops interplanted with market crops. But in our case, where we actually, we do a lot of tractor tillage, and we have large areas that we're planting at once and then harvesting and then tilling under, leaving a bed to go to seed in the midst of that can really be a challenge for the next phases. If you want to seed cover crops and then incorporate it, you just have this bed that's lasting there 2 or 3 months longer than everything else. And so that's why we've kind of designed our crop plans in our fields to keep things together that are, have similar irrigation patterns, harvest patterns, and how long they're in the field for.
Yeah, and I think this is a great place to get you to talk a little bit about the Farmer Spreadsheet Academy, because I know that has to take a lot of planning and technical savvy to be able to keep up with that. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So the Farmer Spreadsheet Academy is a project that is a new project for me, but it's many years in the coming. Years ago, my co-farmer Fred and I, we wrote a crop planning book, and we've been really into the whole crop planning aspect of farming, and very spreadsheet based. And over the years, I've just gotten more and more into how spreadsheets work and figured out how to do a better job crop planning them without moving towards specialized apps or other software. And at this point, I think that they're a really great tool for farmers on their farm to look at all kinds of information, not just crop planning, and looking at their financials or looking at their marketing, looking at their harvest plans. And I find that a lot of farmers have the willingness and interest to do it, but they don't necessarily have all the skills. And so they're good with an out-of-the-box kind of template, but quickly it's not quite perfect for their farm, and they like to make it work more for their farm but don't know what to do. And so that's where the Farmer Spreadsheet Academy comes in, is that I've been so there's two things I'm doing. One is I have a weekly spreadsheet tip that I give out through YouTube and Facebook every week, where I'm just doing something related to spreadsheets. And they don't necessarily, like, they build on each other over time, but they're independent one from the other. But then I'm also in the process of launching an actual course that's going to be based on a couple fundamentals of how to, I guess, three core fundamentals. One is how to take your spreadsheet and get a report or a dashboard that really shows you what you need to know. Another is how to get the data into your spreadsheet using forms or other things, and then how to get all your spreadsheets to talk to each other. And so that's a course I'm planning on launching shortly to deal with this.
That's great, Dan. That's going to be super awesome. Dan Brisebois, we appreciate your time so much.
Well, it's been a pleasure, and I've been enjoying discovering this podcast. So thank you for having me on.
All right, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out Dan's Farmer Spreadsheet Academy at farmerspreadsheetacademy.com, and also check out his seed blog. That's goingtoseed.net. It's great. Dan is on Instagram and Facebook. I will put the links in the show notes. We are also on Instagram and Facebook ourselves, so look us up at No-Till Growers. We should come up. Also check us out at no-tillgrowers.com and the Patreon page, patreon.com/farmerjesse. You can also Venmo us a couple bucks if you're just like, hey, that was an awesome show. Here's a couple bucks. That would be great. Our Venmo handle is at No-Till Growers. That's ampersand No-Till Growers. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you're getting it. Share it with a friend. The last one really helps. Sharing it is carrying it. That's not a phrase. Anyway, share it on Facebook. Email it. Anyone you think may enjoy the podcast, let them know about it. We appreciate that. Otherwise, thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
The actual city of Montreal has pushed Halloween till Friday, but the community that we go to is keeping it tonight. So because the kids are the kids are pretty excited, so we're gonna see if we can still do it tonight.
I love that. That's the Quebecois spirit right there.